I never imagined that lying in a hospital bed could feel so much like waking into a nightmare I had been living without knowing it. My body was weak, trembling with exhaustion and confusion, my mind a fog of painkillers and fear. And yet, the first thing I noticed when I blinked my eyes open wasn't the sterile smell of disinfectant or the incessant beeping of the monitors. It was my phone, lying inches from my hand, glowing with notifications I wasn't ready to read. One message stood out from the rest, piercing through the haze. "I deserve this after everything I've done for you." Those words, casual yet venomous, were from the one person I had trusted more than anyone in my life. My husband, Daniel. It's strange how betrayal finds you when you're at your most vulnerable. I had always thought I could recognize the signs. After all, I'm not naive. I pay attention. I care. I notice when something is off. But lying there, hooked to monitors, with tubes snaking in and out of me, I realized that I had missed everything. Every tiny lie, every secret transaction, every subtle manipulation, all of it had gone unnoticed, because I never thought the person I loved could also be the one to destroy me. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And then, there was the bank alert. My stomach dropped the moment I opened the app. Every penny I had worked for, saved, and planned to spend on the life I imagined gone. Daniel had cleaned out my accounts while I was unconscious, completely incapable of defending myself. The irony was suffocating. He knew I had just undergone surgery, that my body was fragile, that I was trusting him to be there when I woke up. And yet, he had seen this as the perfect opportunity. I remember staring at the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen, my mind racing through 1,000 questions at once. Do I confront him immediately while still weak? Do I wait until I'm stronger? Do I scream? Or do I do nothing? In the end, I did what I always do when faced with shock and betrayal. I sent a single thumbs-up emoji in reply. Nothing more. No argument. No tears. Just a quiet acknowledgement that I had seen him for who he truly was. Thinking back, the signs had always been there, tucked beneath the facade of love and domestic bliss. Daniel had a way of charming everyone he met. Friends adored him. Neighbors commented on how perfect our relationship seemed. On the surface, he was the ideal husband, attentive, generous, funny. But there were cracks, tiny fissures I had dismissed as stress or bad days. He was always checking his phone, shielding it when I entered the room. He made subtle comments about my spending habits, not out of concern, but almost as if he were testing my boundaries. And money? That had always been his way of controlling the narrative. As I lay in that hospital bed, my body fragile and my trust shattered, I couldn't help but replay the last few weeks in my mind. Daniel had insisted I take it easy before my surgery, that I let him handle the bills and errands. I had trusted him. I had thought, for the briefest moment, that maybe he truly cared about my health and my peace of mind. And then, in the span of a few hours, everything I had believed about him, about us, about my life, came crashing down. I wanted to cry, but tears didn't come. My emotions were tangled: anger, disbelief, sadness, and a kind of hollow numbness that I had never experienced before. I kept asking myself, how could someone look me in the eye every day, profess love and devotion, and simultaneously plot my financial destruction? How could I have been so blind? My mind was spinning, replaying every conversation, every text, every small moment of tension that I had written off as trivial or imagined. And slowly, a frightening realization settled in. This wasn't just about money. This was about control, about power. About someone exploiting the trust one had given so freely, without a second thought. The hospital room was quiet, almost oppressively so. Nurses moved in and out with mechanical efficiency, checking vitals and administering medications. The monotony of their movements contrasted sharply with the chaos inside me. I felt trapped not by the hospital, not by my body, but by the sudden knowledge of betrayal. And as I glanced at the door, half expecting Daniel to appear with some faint excuse, I realized that this confrontation, this reckoning, was mine alone to face. He had chosen his move, now it was up to me to decide mine. I thought about my best friend, Maya, who had always been the voice of reason in my life. She had warned me before, gently nudging me to pay attention to the little things, to trust my instincts. I had smiled politely and nodded, convinced I was imagining trouble where none existed. Now, I wished more than anything that I had listened. Maya would have helped me strategize, helped me fight back, helped me reclaim what was mine. But she wasn't there. I was alone, physically weakened, and emotionally raw. Even as the reality of the financial devastation sank in, a part of me couldn't help but be fascinated by the sheer audacity of what Daniel had done. It wasn't just a crime of opportunity, it was premeditated, carefully calculated, executed while I was powerless. And that, I realized, was what made it so terrifying. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a testament to his character. Or, more accurately, the absence of it. And yet, despite everything, part of me clung to a sliver of disbelief. Could this really be happening? Could the person I had trusted with my life, with my heart, with my dreams, really be capable of something so cold, so deliberate? I tried to imagine what his rationale might have been, but it was impossible. There was no logic, no reason that made sense from any angle but his own. And that, I suppose, was the most painful truth of all. He had no guilt, no shame, no intention of making amends. This was his choice, and it had nothing to do with me, except that I was the unwitting victim. Time seemed to stretch endlessly in that hospital room. Each beep of the monitor was a cruel reminder that life moves forward, even when you're stuck in shock. And in the silence, my mind began to plan. I didn't know how or when or what the exact steps would be. But I knew one thing: I wouldn't let this go. I wouldn't allow him to rewrite my life, erase my security, or diminish my worth. Something had shifted inside me in that moment, a quiet, simmering determination that I had never felt before. But as I lay there, staring at my phone and thinking about what I would do next, I realized something else. Daniel's betrayal was just the beginning. The financial ruin, the shock, the anger, they were merely the first layer. What came next, the revelations that had been lurking beneath the surface of our marriage, were about to emerge. And I had no idea just how deep the rabbit hole went. I tried to remember the last conversation we had before my surgery. He had kissed me on the forehead, whispered that he loved me, promised that he would take care of everything. I had believed him. I had trusted him. And now, in the sterile quiet of a hospital room, with a drained body and an empty bank account, I realized that every word had been a lie. Every kiss, every whisper, every touch, it had all been a setup for the moment when I was powerless, when I could be exploited without resistance. I don't know how long I lay there before someone came in. Time had lost all meaning. The world outside the hospital walls continued in its normal rhythm, oblivious to the storm that had just hit my life. And then, as the door opened and the nurse checked my phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel. I didn't open it. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing he had broken me. Instead, I put the phone down and closed my eyes, trying to gather the fragments of strength I still had left. Even in that moment of despair, a small voice inside me whispered, "This isn't over. It's only just beginning." And when I finally returned home, when I faced him again, I would see him for who he truly was. No charm. No lies. No false promises. Just the man who had taken everything from me while I was at my most vulnerable. They say love blinds you, but I never thought it would do so in a way that left me utterly exposed. Before the hospital, before the betrayal, before the life-altering text message from Daniel, everything seemed perfect. Our home was immaculate, filled with warmth, laughter, and the subtle hum of what I thought was mutual love. Daniel was attentive, charming, the kind of husband who remembered the smallest details, my favorite coffee from the local cafe, the way I crinkled my nose when I laughed, even the way my hands fidgeted when I was nervous. On the outside, our life looked like something out of a magazine. Friends envied us, neighbors complimented our ideal marriage, and even distant relatives called to ask how we did it, how we made love, companionship, and careers seem so effortless. But behind the smiles and carefully curated posts on social media, Cracks had been forming for years, and I was oblivious. Or maybe I didn't want to see them. Daniel had a way of twisting even the smallest doubts into my own fault. A bill missing? My oversight. A suspicious phone call? I was imagining it. Spending too much? He was concerned, that's all. It wasn't until I lay in that hospital bed that I realized how subtly manipulative he had been, how expertly he had constructed a life in which I was simultaneously adored and controlled. I remember one particular evening, just a week before my surgery. We had hosted a dinner party for a few close friends. Daniel had been the perfect host, pouring wine, cracking jokes, making everyone laugh, but I noticed something that later haunted me. Every so often, he would glance at his phone with an almost imperceptible flicker of anxiety before putting it away with a smile. At the time, I dismissed it. He's busy with work, I told myself. But that small moment, that tiny twitch, was a thread. And like all threads, if pulled, it unraveled everything. Daniel's charm was disarming, but it was also a weapon. He would shower me with affection after a disagreement, distract me with grand gestures when I pressed about small things, and make me feel guilty for questioning him. I had no idea that while he was winning arguments with kindness, he was plotting something far more insidious behind my back. Money, trust, security, none of it was safe. I think what makes betrayal so devastating is the way it twists memory. I started replaying moments I had taken for granted. The weekend getaway he suggested, where he insisted he had taken care of everything so I could rest, the gift cards he gave me for no reason, the little envelopes he tucked into drawers with vague notes. At the time, I thought they were thoughtful, romantic. Now I see them for what they were, rehearsals in deception, experiments in control. But it wasn't just the overt actions, it was the subtle psychological conditioning. Daniel had a way of speaking that planted seeds of doubt in my mind about my own judgment. I only want the best for you, he would say, as if questioning him was selfish. You don't understand how complicated life is, he'd add, turning my concern into guilt. I had believed him, and that belief had cost me everything. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. His fascination with our finances, the casual questions about my work, his habit of checking my bank statements for my safety. All of it was part of the illusion. But it was so expertly disguised that I only recognized the pattern after the damage was done. How could I have seen it before? Maybe I didn't want to. On the morning of my collapse, I remember the strange sense of fatigue, the heaviness that had settled in my chest. I brushed it off as stress, overwork, maybe anxiety. Daniel noticed, of course, and immediately swooped in, offering to take care of everything. He insisted I rest, made me tea, adjusted pillows, whispered that I didn't need to worry about a single thing. And I believed him. I trusted him completely. Little did I know, that trust was the key he needed to unlock everything I had worked for. It's ironic, really. The very acts of love and care I had cherished were the very things that blinded me. The weekend trips? Opportunities for him to divert attention while executing small, but calculated withdrawals. The dinners? Moments for him to reassure me while secretly checking the status of my accounts. Every gesture, every kiss, every whispered promise, it was all part of a script designed to keep me oblivious. And I had been the perfect audience. Even the way he handled arguments was revealing in retrospect. Daniel never raised his voice, never physically intimidated me. He disarmed me with logic, with charm, with gentle persuasion. I thought our disagreements were normal, healthy, even constructive. In reality, each conversation was a subtle test of my boundaries, a probe for weaknesses, a rehearsal for the ultimate betrayal. But the world outside our home had no idea. Friends and neighbors continued to praise him, to ask how I managed to find someone so perfect. And me? I smiled, laughed, and kept the illusion alive, not just for them, but for myself. It was easier to believe in perfection than to confront the faint, nagging suspicion that something was off. Then came the collapse. One moment I was making breakfast, the next I was on the floor, dizziness and pain overwhelming me, unable to stand, unable to think clearly. Daniel was there immediately, of course, as if on cue, catching me, whispering reassurances. I wanted to believe him. I clung to him. I trusted him with my body, my life, and unknowingly, my future security. I didn't know then that this moment, the collapse, the ambulance ride, the surgery, was the perfect storm. While I lay unconscious, Daniel acted. What he did next would redefine everything I thought I knew about him, about trust, about love itself. He had been building to this, orchestrating it like a masterful performance. And I had been completely blind, completely unaware, completely vulnerable. Even as I think about it now, it's hard to describe the mixture of emotions I felt in the hospital before I learned the full extent of what he had done: disbelief, fear, sorrow, anger, confusion. And yet, there was also a strange, sharp clarity that comes with betrayal of this magnitude. I realized, in a way I hadn't before, that the world doesn't hand you lessons gently. Sometimes it slams them into you while you're defenseless, leaving you to pick up the pieces and decide whether to crumble or fight. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment the illusion began to unravel. It wasn't when I collapsed, not when I awoke in the hospital. It was in the quiet, insidious moments that I had dismissed, the secretive phone calls, the fleeting expressions of anxiety when I entered a room, the way he always seemed to know what I would do before I did it. They were breadcrumbs, subtle but deliberate, leading to a revelation I would never forget. And as I lay in that hospital bed, I realized the most horrifying truth. The perfect life I had believed in was nothing more than an elaborate illusion. The love I had cherished, the trust one had given so freely, the dreams I had nurtured, they were all tools in a game I hadn't even known I was playing. And the player on the other side? My husband, Daniel, whose charm and calculated deception had masked a deeply manipulative, self-serving agenda. The collapse, the hospitalization, the uncertainty, it was the point where the illusion shattered completely. And yet, even in that moment of devastation, there was a small, flickering ember inside me. A resolve to survive, to reclaim, to see the truth fully and confront it head-on. But I had no idea how much worse the betrayal would get, how deep Daniel's deception went, or what I would face when I finally returned home. I woke in a haze, the world around me a blur of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells, the metallic taste of fear heavy on my tongue. The beeping of monitors was relentless, each sound a reminder that I was no longer in control of my body or my life. My limbs felt like lead, unresponsive and foreign, and every attempt to lift a hand, to call out, was met with exhaustion and sharp, twisting pain. I blinked against the glare of the hospital lights and tried to orient myself, but reality refused to settle neatly into place. Then my eyes landed on the phone. At first, I thought it was just another notification, something trivial. But one glance at the screen made my stomach lurch. There it was, sitting like a viper in the grass. A message from Daniel. I deserve this after everything I've done for you. I stared at it, unable to breathe properly, unable to comprehend the casual cruelty of those words. And yet, instinctively, I knew I couldn't let him see the extent of their effect. I replied with a single thumbs-up emoji, an act of quiet defiance, a small assertion of control in a situation where I had none. The chaos of the emergency room itself only amplified my vulnerability. Nurses rushed in and out, their voices clipped but tinged with concern. The fluorescent lights made shadows dance across the walls, long, distorted shapes that seemed to mirror the fear twisting in my gut. Machines hissed, monitors beeped, IVs dripped steadily, the sterile environment a stark contrast to the storm raging in my mind. I tried to focus on breathing, to ground myself, but it was nearly impossible. Everything hurt, everything was foreign, and I was painfully aware of my own helplessness. Daniel was there, of course. That was the first thing I noticed as my consciousness sharpened. His face loomed over mine, the expression carefully measured, concern laced with just enough charm to disarm. My body wanted to trust him, it had always wanted to trust him, but my instincts screamed otherwise. I could feel the tension radiating off him, a subtle energy that didn't match the words of reassurance he offered. "You're okay," he whispered, though his eyes flickered just enough to betray unease. "I'm here. Don't worry about a thing." And yet, even in that moment, A small part of me wanted to believe him. I wanted the comfort of familiarity, the soothing cadence of a voice I had loved for years. But the phone was there, buzzing incessantly, a silent witness to his duplicity. My thumb hovered over the screen, and I realized the depth of the betrayal. I had been completely powerless, my trust weaponized against me in the most calculated way possible. The hospital staff worked around us with a practiced efficiency that I envied. They were calm, methodical, focused on the physical realities of my condition. The chaos of my emotions, however, was invisible to them. And that invisibility made it all the more terrifying. Here I was, lying in a bed that should have been a sanctuary, while the person who was supposed to protect me had orchestrated my financial ruin. Time blurred. Moments stretched into what felt like hours, or perhaps minutes, I couldn't tell. My mind oscillated between disbelief, rage, and a sort of numb shock. I couldn't reconcile the Daniel I thought I knew, the attentive, loving husband, with the man whose message gleamed on my phone like a neon warning sign. And yet, part of me remained strangely analytical, noticing every detail, cataloging evidence in my mind for a confrontation I didn't yet know how to stage. Other patients came and went, and I glimpsed slices of lives that contrasted sharply with my own. An elderly man shuffled past on a gurney. A young mother clutched her child, frantic. They didn't know my story, and I didn't have the energy to explain. But observing them, I felt the cruel irony of my situation. The chaos that Daniel had introduced into my life was invisible to the world. Everyone else could carry on, oblivious to the betrayal that had unfolded while I was incapacitated. As I struggled to focus, fragments of conversation reached me in disjointed waves. Nurses talking about schedules, doctors discussing procedures, a technician murmuring something about lab results. Amid the white noise, one snippet stood out. Financial abuse cases can often escalate unnoticed, even within families. It's shocking how calculated they can be. My pulse quickened at the coincidence, or maybe it wasn't a coincidence at all. My situation was unfolding exactly as described, the textbook example of exploitation during vulnerability. Daniel moved closer, placing a hand on my arm. It should have been comforting. It should have reassured me. But every instinct screamed danger. The warmth of his touch was now tinged with suspicion. He was calm, almost too calm, speaking in soft tones, answering questions I hadn't even asked. Yet the phone in my hand reminded me of the reality I couldn't escape. He had emptied my accounts, undermined my security, and dared to frame it as entitlement. And I had been powerless to stop it. Then came the moment when I realized the extent of my physical fragility. Simple movements, turning my head, lifting an arm, sent waves of pain through me. I could feel weakness in my core, trembling in my fingers, and the stark truth hit me. My vulnerability wasn't just emotional. It was absolute. And that vulnerability had been exploited in the most ruthless way possible. A nurse approached, clipboard in hand, and began explaining my post-surgery care in clipped, professional terms. I nodded absently, caught between focusing on her instructions and replaying Daniel's message over and over in my mind. I deserve this after everything I've done for you. The words, meant to justify, to control, had instead ignited something I couldn't yet name. Rage, perhaps. Resolve, maybe. And beneath it all, a trembling question: what else had he done while I lay unconscious, incapable of defending myself? I glanced around the room. Machines beeped, 4 lines dripped, a clock ticked relentlessly. Everything moved forward, indifferent to my shock, my betrayal, my loss. And that's when I realized something else. Daniel's manipulation was ongoing. He hadn't merely taken my money. He had planned this moment of perfect vulnerability, executed it while I was incapacitated, and now he was waiting for me to awaken, to realize the truth. And in that realization lay the power and the danger. The minutes dragged on, each second punctuated by the low hum of hospital machinery and the occasional rustle of footsteps. I tried to focus on breathing, on grounding myself, on remembering that my body had survived the trauma that had landed me here. But every conscious thought circled back to Daniel. What had he done with the money? Who knew? Did anyone suspect? And most terrifying of all, what would he do next, now that the first act of betrayal had been completed? And then, just as I thought I could gather enough strength to sit up, to confront, to demand answers, another notification appeared on my phone. I didn't open it immediately. Part of me wanted to, but part of me recoiled, not yet ready for the emotional weight of what else might be waiting. I pressed my lips together, trying to steady my racing heart. I realized then that awakening in the hospital wasn't the end of my nightmare, it was just the beginning. Because when I was finally discharged the following day, I would have to return to a home that no longer felt like mine. And I would have to face Daniel in the full light of reality, armed only with the fragments of evidence I could piece together while still weak, still recovering, still reeling from shock. The chaos of the emergency room had ended, but the storm was far from over. And I knew, deep down, that the confrontation awaiting me at home would be far more complicated and far more dangerous than anything I had faced in the sterile, controlled environment of the hospital. The moment I opened my bank app, the world tilted on its axis. Every account, every savings, every carefully planned investment, gone. My stomach dropped, a lead weight dragging me into a pit I couldn't escape. I stared at the numbers, convinced I must be seeing a glitch, a mistake, some impossible error that could be corrected with a phone call or a simple explanation. But no. The reality hit me like a sledgehammer. Daniel had emptied everything while I lay unconscious. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to wake up from this nightmare and find my money waiting, untouched, in accounts I had trusted with my life. But I was still weak from surgery, barely able to lift my phone, let alone my body. My fingers hovered over the screen, trembling, and for a moment, I considered calling him. Maybe he would explain. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe, just maybe, he hadn't done it. But deep down, I already knew the truth. Daniel had done this deliberately. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. It was calculated, cold, and meant to hurt me at my most vulnerable. Every detail I had ignored, every subtle red flag I had brushed off as paranoia, every tiny inconsistency in his behavior, it all pointed here. And the realization made my blood run cold. I thought back to the small warnings I had ignored, the way he had insisted on controlling bills, the casual questions about passwords, the sudden fascination with our financial security. At the time, I had reassured myself. He was just protective, concerned, trying to help. But now, those moments felt sinister, like the overture to a symphony of betrayal that was far more complex than I had imagined. My mind raced, analyzing every detail, every recent conversation, every interaction. Did he plan this weeks in advance? Months? How long had he been orchestrating this? I realized with a sickening clarity that this was more than financial theft, it was a psychological attack. He had waited for the perfect moment when I was powerless, incapable of defending myself, completely dependent on him. And he had struck. I couldn't let the shock paralyze me. Slowly, deliberately, I began to assess the damage. My accounts were gone. My credit cards maxed out. Bills pending. Automatic payments declined. The future I had been planning, our house, my dream vacation, the small savings I had painstakingly built for emergencies, vanished in an instant. Every effort, every sacrifice, every moment of financial discipline had been erased. I sat there, phone in hand, staring at the screen, trying to process the enormity of it all. The betrayal was not just monetary, it was intimate, personal, and devastating. Daniel had violated the fundamental trust at the core of our relationship. He had weaponized the one thing I assumed we shared equally, the security of our life together. And then came the moment that made my chest tighten in a way that words can barely capture. Daniel entered the room. His expression, calm and almost casual, sent a shiver down my spine. He spoke softly, gently, as if he were comforting a child. "You need to rest," he said. "Don't worry about anything right now." I wanted to scream, to hurl the phone at him, to demand answers. But I couldn't. I was too weak, too shocked, too furious to act in a coherent way. Instead, I clutched the phone like a lifeline, my fingers trembling around the device that had exposed the betrayal I had only begun to comprehend. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape, to remove myself from the man who had destroyed my financial security and shattered my trust. But my body refused. The pain from surgery, the weakness in my limbs, the lingering effects of anesthesia, they rendered me helpless, confined to a bed that should have been a sanctuary, but felt like a cage. Even as I lay there, I could feel the tension between us, the unspoken acknowledgement that the act had occurred, the silent recognition of what had been lost. And yet, Daniel continued to speak in calm tones, his words carefully measured, designed to placate, distract, and disarm. It was infuriating, maddening, and yet eerily effective. I remembered the messages he had sent earlier, the way he framed his betrayal as entitlement. I deserve this after everything I've done for you. Those words now burned in my mind, a mantra of manipulation that underscored the audacity of his actions. He had convinced himself, and perhaps even tried to convince me, that taking my money was justified, a reward for some imagined suffering he had endured. The audacity, the cruelty, and the complete lack of remorse were staggering. The reality of the situation was overwhelming. Not only had Daniel destroyed my financial stability, but he had also challenged my sense of judgment, my ability to trust, and my perception of the man I thought I knew. Every memory, every moment of intimacy, every act of care and love now felt tainted, suspect, potentially a lie. I realized that the betrayal extended far beyond money. It struck at the very foundation of who I was and what I believed about our relationship. Despite the shock, a small spark of clarity emerged. I realized that I had to document everything, to gather evidence, to begin planning my next steps. The betrayal was not just emotional, it was actionable, legal, verifiable. And I would need to confront Daniel with facts, not just anger. But even as I made this mental note, the question loomed, could I do it while still recovering? Could I face him, weak and vulnerable, and stand my ground? The nurse returned, checking my vitals and adjusting my four. I nodded, focusing on breathing, trying to regain some semblance of composure. But my mind was elsewhere, consumed with calculations, memories, and the stark realization that the man I loved had orchestrated this entire nightmare. I tried to remember the last conversation we had before my hospitalization, searching for clues, inconsistencies, anything that might explain the motives behind his actions. Every word, every smile, every gesture now seemed layered with deceit. I felt a chilling sense of clarity. Daniel's betrayal had not been impulsive. It had been methodical, deliberate, and carefully timed to coincide with my moment of vulnerability. Then, just as I began to steady myself, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel. I didn't open it immediately. Part of me feared what I would find, and part of me wanted to see his face when I finally confronted him. The anticipation, the uncertainty, the fear. They all coalesced into a tight knot in my chest, a mix of dread and determination that refused to be ignored. I realized then that awakening in the hospital was only the beginning. The true test, the confrontation, the reckoning, awaited me at home. Daniel had set the stage, and now it was up to me to respond, to reclaim what was mine, and to face the full consequences of his betrayal. And in that quiet, fluorescent-lit hospital room, I made a silent vow. I would not let him get away with this. Not the money, not the trust, not the life I had built. But as I was about to learn, confronting him would reveal even more than financial theft. It would uncover hidden layers of manipulation, deceit, and secrets I could never have imagined. I stared at the message on my phone again, as if somehow repeated exposure might change its meaning. It didn't. Daniel had typed it casually, almost proudly, as though he had performed a remarkable feat rather than committed a betrayal so deep it shook me to my core. I deserve this after everything I've done for you. Every word was calculated, every syllable a razor slicing through the fragile trust one had clung to for years. I didn't cry, not yet. I didn't shout. I didn't beg for an explanation. I simply held the phone in my hand and sent back the single, silent thumbs up. It felt like the only control I had left in a situation where I had none. A tiny act, seemingly insignificant, yet profoundly defiant. It was my acknowledgement that I had seen him, Not the charming husband everyone else admired, not the man who whispered sweet assurances, but the orchestrator of my unraveling. Even as I lay there in the hospital bed, weak and disoriented, a torrent of questions flooded my mind. How long had he been planning this? Were there more accounts I didn't know about? Were there other secrets, hidden under years of seemingly ordinary life, that would come to light once I returned home? I realized then that betrayal wasn't just about one act, it was a lens through which every memory, every shared laugh, every kiss, every gesture could now be examined and found wanting. I thought back to the past few months. Daniel's insistence on managing finances for my own good, the casual dismissal when I questioned minor inconsistencies, the subtle manipulations disguised as concern, everything now fit into a pattern I had been too naive, or perhaps too trusting, to recognize. Each act had been a step, calculated and precise, building toward the moment when I would be utterly powerless. And yet, even in my despair, a flicker of determination emerged. I could no longer ignore the reality staring me in the face. Daniel's betrayal was not merely personal, it was criminal. He had stolen from me, exploited my vulnerability, and acted without remorse. The anger, hot and fierce, began to simmer alongside the grief. For the first time since waking, I felt a sliver of clarity. I couldn't undo what had been done, but I could plan my next moves carefully, deliberately, strategically. The nurses moved in and out, checking vitals, adjusting IVs, and offering small reassurances that barely registered. Their calm professionalism contrasted sharply with the storm inside me. I wondered if anyone in the hospital could sense the emotional earthquake I was experiencing, or if, like the world outside, they remained blissfully unaware of the betrayal unfolding behind the closed curtain of my hospital room. Daniel, for his part, remained close, hovering with a mask of concern that I no longer trusted. Every gesture he made, every word he spoke, felt like part of a performance designed to distract from the truth. "You need to rest," he said again, his tone measured, almost soothing. "Everything will be fine." But I knew the lie in those words. Nothing would be fine, not while he still had the audacity to speak as if he were innocent, not while the financial devastation remained, not while trust, the most fundamental element of our marriage, had been obliterated. I tried to distract myself, focusing on small details in the hospital room, the rhythmic drip of the four, the soft hum of the machines, the muted conversation of staff outside the door. But my mind refused to rest. It circled back to the message over and over, each repetition amplifying the sense of violation. I could almost hear the words spoken aloud in a voice dripping with entitlement, a voice that didn't belong to the man I had loved, but to a stranger who had carefully hidden behind a mask for years. Even the thumbs up I had sent felt like a shield, a small assertion of autonomy in the face of overwhelming powerlessness. It was more than a gesture, it was a declaration. I had seen through him. I recognized the betrayal. And though my body was weak, my mind was sharpening, preparing for the reckoning I knew would come. And yet, as much as I tried to steel myself, a creeping fear began to take hold. What other messages had he sent in my absence? Were there accounts I didn't know about, debts I hadn't yet discovered, secrets buried beneath the layers of our seemingly ordinary life together? The uncertainty gnawed at me, a relentless undertow beneath the surface of anger and grief. I thought about Maya, my best friend, the one person whose judgment I trusted implicitly. She would have seen the signs long before I did, would have questioned the subtle manipulations, would have demanded answers. I wished desperately that she were there, that I could confide in her, that she could help me navigate the treacherous waters I had awakened to. But she wasn't. I was alone, and the weight of isolation pressed down on me with suffocating force. Then came a wave of clarity. I needed to act. Not immediately, my body wouldn't allow it, but soon. I needed to gather evidence, document everything, and prepare for a confrontation that would force Daniel to answer for his actions. The anger that had simmered in my chest now fueled a plan, a quiet strategy born of necessity and a desire for justice. I would not let him control the narrative, nor would I allow him to rewrite history in his favor. As I lay there, I began replaying every interaction I had with Daniel over the past year. Every argument, every compromise, every gesture of supposed kindness, it all took on new meaning. The casual reassurances, the quiet admonishments, the subtle criticisms, everything was part of a larger picture, a mosaic of manipulation that I was only now able to see. And the realization was both terrifying and empowering. I had been blind, yes, but now I was awake. And that awakening came with a dangerous clarity. Daniel's actions were deliberate, and now that I understood their scope, I also understood that I needed to be deliberate in my response. I couldn't act impulsively, not while my body was still weak, not while he maintained the upper hand in terms of mobility and perceived control. I needed strategy, patience, and foresight, qualities I had cultivated over years of managing my own life and finances. Even as these thoughts solidified in my mind, I couldn't ignore the gnawing fear. What else had he done while I lay incapacitated? The message, as casual and entitled as it was, hinted at a level of audacity I was only beginning to comprehend. Daniel had crossed boundaries I had assumed were inviolate, violating not just trust, but every expectation of decency, morality, and fidelity. The enormity of the betrayal was staggering. And yet, amid the shock and fear, a spark of defiance remained. I had been wronged, yes, but I was not defeated. The thumbs up I had sent was more than an acknowledgement. It was a promise to myself that I would confront this betrayal, uncover its full scope, and reclaim control over my life. The storm had begun, and though I was still in its eye, I could sense the winds of change gathering, ready to propel me toward a confrontation I could no longer avoid. Because what I had just discovered, the casual, entitled message, the empty accounts, the betrayal during my most vulnerable moment, was only the first act. The subsequent revelations, the confrontations, the unraveling of a life I had believed secure, were still to come. And I knew, with a certainty that both terrified and strengthened me, that facing Daniel would reveal far more than I could currently imagine. The message that broke me had also awakened something else, a determination, a clarity, a need for justice that would not be silenced. And I knew, as I lay in that quiet, fluorescent-lit hospital room, that returning home would mark the beginning of a reckoning that neither Daniel nor I could predict. The front door felt heavier than it had ever been. I gripped the handle, paused, and drew a shaky breath, trying to summon the strength to step inside. Home should have been a sanctuary, a place of comfort after the chaos of the hospital. Instead, it felt like a trap. The walls, the furniture, the familiar decor, all the symbols of our shared life, now seemed foreign, suffused with the quiet menace of betrayal. Every step I took across the threshold was a reminder that the perfect life I had imagined was gone. Daniel was there, of course, standing casually in the living room, as though he had been waiting for me. His expression was calm, almost nonchalant, but I could sense the tension lurking just beneath the surface. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that once reassured me, now sharp and cold. "Welcome home," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. "How are you feeling?" I nodded silently, keeping my voice steady even though it trembled on the inside. The truth, my shock, my anger, my fear was too raw to voice. He didn't need my words, he already knew. The message, the empty bank accounts, the months of subtle manipulation, they had all been part of a carefully orchestrated plan. And now, as I faced him in the quiet of our living room, I realized that this home, the space I had trusted utterly, had become a stage for confrontation, and I was stepping into it on his terms. My eyes scanned the room instinctively, noting small details that previously would have gone unnoticed. Receipts left in drawers, files tucked into corners, bank statements partially visible behind decorative items. These were the remnants of a life I had assumed was shared equally, now revealed as tools in a game of control and deceit. Each discovery tightened the knot of anger in my chest, a slow burn that refused to be ignored. Daniel's charm was still intact, dangerously so. He spoke carefully, gently, as if trying to soothe an upset child rather than the partner he had just betrayed. "You need to rest," he said, gesturing toward the couch. "Everything else can wait." But his eyes, calm and calculating, betrayed a knowledge he wasn't willing to share, an awareness of just how much he had taken, how carefully he had covered his tracks, and how confident he was that I was still weak and vulnerable. I remembered the thumbs up I had sent in the hospital, the small, silent declaration that I had seen him for what he was. And now, facing him directly, I understood its significance more than ever. It was not defiance in words, it was defiance in presence. It was the beginning of a strategy, the first step in reclaiming control, even as my body and mind were still recovering from the shock. The room was quiet, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Daniel moved closer, his movements smooth, deliberate. "I know this is hard," he said, voice low, almost empathetic. "But we can work through it." My stomach churned at the audacity, at the sheer nerve of speaking as if he were innocent. But I didn't respond. My silence was a statement more powerful than words. It was my refusal to be manipulated further, my way of keeping him off balance while I gathered my thoughts. As I set my bag down and moved slowly to the couch, I realized something terrifying. The financial betrayal, though severe, was only the beginning. The signs I had ignored, the subtle manipulations, the carefully concealed secrets, they all hinted at a deeper pattern. Daniel's betrayal wasn't just about money, it was about control, about dominance, about reshaping our lives according to his desires while keeping me unaware. And the realization sent a cold shiver down my spine. I thought about the life we had built together, or rather, the illusion of it. The vacations, the dinners, the quiet nights at home, they had all felt real, meaningful. But now, with the financial devastation and the calculated cruelty of his message, I saw them in a new light. They were not gestures of love or partnership, they were tools, distractions, a performance designed to keep me compliant, trusting, and unaware. And yet, despite the fear, a spark of clarity burned within me. I was beginning to see the pattern, to understand the strategy, to recognize the man behind the mask. Daniel's confidence, his calm demeanor, his casual reassurances. They were all part of the game. And games, I reminded myself, could be countered, outmaneuvered, and ultimately won. I moved through the house slowly, noting details that could serve as evidence later, hidden receipts, documents carelessly left in plain sight, bank statements that hinted at transactions I hadn't authorized. Each piece was a clue, a fragment of the betrayal I would eventually confront him with. My mind, though exhausted, began to map out the path forward, the steps I would need to take to reclaim control over my life. Daniel followed me quietly, his presence almost predatory in its calm. "I just want to make sure you're okay," he said. "We can talk about everything later." But the words rang hollow. I knew that the conversation he envisioned would not be about accountability, it would be about spinning the narrative, manipulating the facts, and maintaining his control. And I realized that I had to be careful, patient, strategic, and deliberate. The living room, once a place of comfort, now felt like a stage set for confrontation. Every corner, every shadow, every familiar object reminded me that the life I had trusted was an illusion. And as I sat down, physically weary but mentally alert, I understood that the homecoming I had anticipated, reunion, relief, comfort, was instead the beginning of a more intense, more dangerous chapter of betrayal. The clock ticked slowly, the minutes stretching endlessly as Daniel hovered nearby. I could feel his eyes on me, watching, calculating. And I knew, in that quiet, heavy moment, that he had no intention of surrendering control willingly. If I wanted justice, if I wanted to reclaim what was mine, I would have to act, and carefully. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, allowing myself to acknowledge the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm me: fear, anger, disbelief, sorrow. Each one sharpened my awareness, made me more vigilant, more focused. And then I opened my eyes, and a cold determination settled over me. Daniel had underestimated me. He had assumed weakness. But he didn't know me as well as he thought. The house, once my sanctuary, had become a battlefield. Every room, every object, every familiar corner now carried the weight of betrayal. And as I braced myself for what would come next, I knew that facing Daniel directly, Standing my ground, demanding answers, confronting the full extent of his actions, was inevitable. But even as I prepared mentally, a creeping dread took hold. What if the betrayal went deeper than I had imagined? What if Daniel's machinations extended beyond money, beyond manipulation, into areas I had never suspected? The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I realized that the true scope of his deception might not be revealed until I was forced to confront him fully. By the time I finally called Maya, my hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't hold the phone. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm and familiar, like a lifeline pulling me out of the storm. "Emily? Are you okay?" she asked, immediately sensing the tremor in my voice. I hesitated, choking back tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed, before finally whispering no. I need you. Something's happened. Something terrible." Maya didn't ask questions immediately. She didn't interrupt. She just stayed on the line, letting me gather the courage to speak. And then, the words spilled out of me, raw and unfiltered. The hospital, the collapse, the surgery, the message, the empty bank accounts. I recounted everything as best I could, each sentence a cathartic release, each pause a reminder of how isolated I had felt before reaching out to her. Maya's silence was reassuring at first, but when she finally spoke, it was sharp, precise, and infused with the clarity I had been craving. "Emily," she said, her voice firm, "you're in danger. Not just financially, emotionally, psychologically. Daniel's actions are calculated. He waited until you were powerless. That's manipulation on a level most people can't even imagine." Her words, though frightening, were strangely empowering. For the first time since waking in the hospital, I felt like I wasn't completely alone in this. Maya's insight pierced through the fog of confusion and shock that had enveloped me, providing a perspective I couldn't find on my own. She reminded me that betrayal of this magnitude wasn't just about one act, it was a series of calculated moves, each designed to undermine my confidence, control my decisions, and isolate me from any support network. As we spoke, I began to notice patterns I had missed before. The casual dismissal of minor financial discrepancies, the way Daniel always insisted on handling certain tasks for my own good, the subtle shifts in his demeanor whenever I approached sensitive topics. They were all pieces of a puzzle I was only now able to assemble. And the picture they formed was chilling. Daniel had been planning this for months, possibly longer, with a precision that was both terrifying and maddening. Maya didn't just listen, she strategized with me. "You need to document everything," she advised, her tone urgent. "Every message, every withdrawal, every suspicious transaction. Screenshots, statements, records. You need proof if this goes further, legally or otherwise. And Emily, be careful. Don't let him know how much you've discovered. This isn't just about money, it's about control, and he'll fight to maintain it." I felt a surge of determination at her words. For the first time in days, I felt like I had a plan, a roadmap for how to reclaim some measure of control over a situation that had seemed hopeless. Maya's calm, precise guidance cut through the haze of fear and betrayal, giving me the focus I desperately needed. We talked for hours, parsing through every interaction, every text, every minor discrepancy I had dismissed as trivial. Maya helped me see the bigger picture, connecting dots I hadn't realized existed. And as we spoke, a sense of clarity began to replace the fog of shock. Daniel's pattern was no longer invisible, it was exposed, and that exposure was the first step toward reclaiming my life. Even as the conversation progressed, however, a sense of dread lingered. I couldn't shake the question, how much deeper did this betrayal go? Maya and I discussed the possibility that the financial manipulation was only one facet of a larger strategy. Could Daniel have hidden other secrets, other actions that would further destabilize my life once revealed? The thought was terrifying, and yet, facing it head-on with Maya by my side gave me a sense of preparedness I hadn't felt before. She also helped me anticipate Daniel's potential responses. "He'll try to manipulate you," Maya warned. "He'll charm, distract, guilt-trip. Expect it. Plan your reactions. Don't let him see weakness, he'll exploit it. And most importantly, protect yourself." Not just financially, but emotionally. Keep your boundaries clear. Her advice, though practical, also resonated on a deeper level. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, I felt like I had an ally, someone who could help me navigate the treacherous waters ahead. Maya's presence, even over the phone, was a lifeline, reminder that I didn't have to face this nightmare alone. As we wrapped up the call, Maya's words lingered in my mind. "This is going to be hard, Emily. But you're stronger than you realize. And you're not powerless, you have me, and you have the truth. Use it." Hanging up, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. Exhaustion from the emotional intensity of recounting the betrayal, resolve from the clarity of having an ally and a plan. I began to organize my thoughts, jotting down notes about transactions, screenshots to capture evidence, and the questions I would need to ask Daniel. Each note, each record, felt like a small victory, a step toward reclaiming control over the chaos he had wrought. Even as I worked, however, a shadow of doubt crept in. How would Daniel respond if he sensed that I was no longer naive, no longer compliant, no longer blind to his manipulations? What lengths would he go to maintain control? And what other layers of betrayal had yet to surface, waiting for the right moment to strike? The uncertainty was frightening, but it also steeled my resolve. I would not allow fear to dictate my actions. By the time the night fell, I was physically exhausted, emotionally drained, but mentally alert in a way I hadn't been since waking in the hospital. I realized that the betrayal had done something unexpected. It had awakened a vigilance, a strategic mindset, and a determination I hadn't known I possessed. Daniel had intended to weaken me, to destabilize me, to control me. Instead, he had inadvertently strengthened my resolve, forcing me to confront the truth and prepare for the battles ahead. And as I finally lay down to rest, my mind was not at peace, but it was focused. Focused on uncovering the full extent of Daniel's betrayal, on protecting myself, and on taking deliberate steps to reclaim my life. Because I knew, with absolute certainty, that the next encounter with him would not just be a conversation, it would be a confrontation, and I needed to be ready. What I didn't yet realize, however, was just how far Daniel was willing to go to maintain his control, and how many secrets still lurked beneath the surface of the life I had once trusted completely. I waited until the house was quiet, the soft hum of the night masking the pounding of my heart. Every fiber of my being was tense, coiled like a spring, ready for the confrontation I had dreaded but knew was inevitable. Daniel was in the kitchen, moving with that casual ease he always carried, completely unaware that I had prepared myself, not just mentally, but strategically, for the moment I would challenge him. I stepped into the room, careful not to startle him, careful not to reveal the storm brewing inside me. "Daniel," I said, my voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of every realization, every betrayal I had uncovered. He looked up, that familiar smile on his face, a smile that once reassured me, now a mask I could finally see through. "Emily," he said smoothly, tilting his head. "You're home early. How are you feeling?" The charm was there, of course, it was always there, but now it rang hollow. I could see it for what it was, a calculated attempt to regain control, to distract, to disarm. But I wasn't falling for it. Not anymore. "I'm feeling." "Aware," I replied, letting the word hang between us, heavy with unspoken accusations. "Aware that you emptied my accounts while I was in the hospital. Aware that you think a text can justify taking what isn't yours. Aware of everything you've done to manipulate me." For a moment, he froze, just enough for me to sense the shift. The casual confidence, the air of entitlement, it wavered. A flicker of something crossed his face, maybe surprise, maybe irritation. He recovered quickly, of course, smiling again, trying to mask whatever reaction had slipped through. "Emily," he said softly, "you're misunderstanding. I only took what I believed was fair. You'll see, we can work this out." But I wasn't deceived. "Fair?" I repeated, incredulous. "You think taking my money, without consent, while I was unconscious, is fair? That's not fairness, Daniel. That's theft. That's betrayal. That's manipulation." He paused, and I saw the first cracks in his composure. Daniel had always been masterful at maintaining control through charm, through logic, through quiet intimidation. But for the first time, I could see it, the mask slipping, the carefully constructed persona faltering. And it gave me strength. I advanced slowly, holding my phone in my hand, the evidence of his betrayal glowing on the screen. "Look at this," I said, pressing it into his line of sight. Bank statements, screenshots, the messages he had sent me in the hospital. Each piece was undeniable, a record of the manipulation he had executed so flawlessly, until now. Daniel's expression flickered again, annoyance briefly replaced by calculation. He knew that a single misstep, a crack in his control, could undo months of careful planning. But he was still dangerous, still unpredictable. "Emily," he said, trying to regain his composure, "you're overreacting. You don't understand the complexity of this. We can fix it together." Together. I echoed, my voice rising slightly, a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You think we can fix this together? After what you've done? You think a few soothing words erase betrayal, deception, and theft?" I could feel the heat of my anger, the adrenaline fueling my resolve. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. He leaned back slightly, still smiling, though the tension in his posture betrayed him. For the first time, I realized just how much he relied on my compliance, on my silence, on my willingness to look the other way. And that realization was liberating. I didn't have to comply. I didn't have to forgive. I didn't have to be manipulated anymore. "I've documented everything," I said, my voice steady now, unwavering. "Every message, every withdrawal, every suspicious action. You cannot deny this. And I will not let you control the narrative any longer. I will confront this head-on, with evidence, with witnesses, and with the truth." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, the first hint of anger or perhaps panic. He shifted, subtly, as if calculating the next move, weighing options, testing boundaries. "Emily," he said slowly, almost hypnotically, "you don't understand. You're letting emotions cloud your judgment. I only did what I thought was necessary." "Necessary?" I repeated, incredulous. "Necessary to betray your spouse? To steal from me while I was helpless? That's not necessity, that's manipulation, pure and simple. And I won't stand for it." For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of a wall clock. His breathing was measured, his expression carefully neutral, but I could sense the tension radiating off him like heat from a fire. Daniel, the man who had so effortlessly controlled situations for years, was finally uncertain. And I felt a small, fierce satisfaction. But even as I stood there, holding him accountable for his actions, I knew this confrontation was only the beginning. Daniel was dangerous, not physically, but psychologically. His charm, his manipulation, his ability to twist reality had been honed over years. And while I had evidence, while I had clarity, while I had determination,